Well, good morning, everyone. As you've been sitting there this morning, you may have been wondering, what is all this stuff up on the stage? Well, was that recreation? I thought we would do something a little bit different for my message today, and that is we're going to start with a riddle. So who here likes riddles? Anyone? Who here hates riddles? Okay, there's a few of you, so most like it, so that's good. So I've got a question for you, and the question is, if this thing is going to work for us. There we go. What do all of these objects have in common? So these are all objects from my house, and that is, no, that's not the thing that they all have in common. And I'm going to introduce you to some of these different objects, and I want you to try to work out what is the thing that connects them all. So firstly, we have here my new tennis racket. And last year, Pastor Fraser and I started playing tennis together. But one of the things that I don't like about playing with Fraser tennis is that he always smashes me. And so I thought, if I'm going to have a chance, I need at least to get a new tennis racket. And so a couple of weeks ago, we got together and I'd been doing a bit of practice, and Fraser was still recovering from a big operation, and I had my new tennis racket and I thought, maybe I'll have a chance. He still smashed me. So there's my tennis racket. Here we have a shovel. Now, earlier in the year, I was doing a project. It's pretty new. So earlier this year, I was doing a project down the side of my house, and I thought, I can't believe I've lived basically my entire life without owning my own shovel. And so I went to Bunnings and I looked through all the different shovels, and I'm quite thorough when it comes to purchases like this. And I looked at all the different features and I found what I thought was the best shovel there, and I purchased it. And you're right, it's still got the sticker on it, so clearly has not been used a whole lot. Number 3, so here is my bike. And this bike has a bit of mud on it, so yes, it does get used. And I love this bike because it's a bike that you can go anywhere with. It's a bike you can go on the dirt trails, you can go on the road. Now, if you're riding with Wayne Ball, you might not be very competitive with a bike like this because he's Mr. Ironman. But this is my bike, and I really enjoy just going outside, getting some fresh air and some exercise on this. Okay, here's another object. Here is one of my Bibles, and this is not the Bible that I preach with because it's pretty massive, but this is my study Bible that I use at home. And one of the things I love about this Bible is it's an international Bible. Not just because it's the New International Version, but when I bought this Bible, it came with this nice little card inside, and it says where all the different parts of the Bible are from. And so the paper is from France, the leather is from India, the ink is from Germany, it was designed in the USA, printed in the Netherlands, and the ribbons are from the UK. So I like this Bible, and not just because it's from all over the place, but because this is where I connect with Jesus in the morning and where I get strength and encouragement from him. Going through, we've got this little thing here. Now, this is one of Alora's favourite objects in the house, and we call this the Tree of Life because it looks like a tree. And this is from IKEA. So if you want one of those, there's plenty in IKEA. Then we've got over here my guitar. Now, I'm not very good at the guitar, but when I left Kingscliff Church, they gave me this as a gift, which I thought was pretty cool. And then behind that, we see this easel. This is Kylie's easel, and it sits in the front room of our house, and it inspires us to be creative. It hasn't had a whole lot of use yet, but it's one of those, it's something that we plan to use, especially Kylie plans to use a lot more. And then we have our picnic basket down the bottom, and finally, I've got a fishing rod here, which I'm going to talk about in a little bit. So, how did you go? What do all of these items have in common? Any ideas? Nourishing for the soul. I like that. I think that's a good enough answer. It's a correct answer, not the answer that I'm thinking of. But sometimes with riddles, you can have a correct answer, and it might not be the right answer. Anyone else? What connects all of these things? Passion. I like that, yep. Hobbies. Okay, they're also hobbies, yep. What else? What was that? They all need me. Okay, they're all things that don't do very good by themselves, like the shovel. They all need your hands. Okay, so there's lots of things that connect all of these things. Well, the one that none of you have said, which is actually the one that we're going to go with for today, is that all of these things can be used to share Jesus with others. All of these things can be used to share Jesus. Now let me give you an example. Let me grab this fishing rod here and share with you how a fishing rod can be used to share Jesus with others. Well, back when I was studying theology at Avondale College, I got invited to go on a ministry trip to the Torres Strait Islands. Now, the Torres Strait Islands, if you don't know, if you go up the east coast of Australia and you get to that pointy part of Australia up the very top, between there and Papua New Guinea is the Torres Strait Islands. And we went to an island called Moa, which is right in between Australia and Papua New Guinea. And on Moa, there's this little village called Cuban Village. And in Cuban Village, there's a Seventh-day Adventist church, which you see the picture of there. There's about 6 people that go to this Seventh-day Adventist church. That's very little. And it's, as you can see, the building is basically a shed. But the reason we went there was because the pastor of the Torres Strait Islands at the time, he was going away for a month and he invited us to go, my friend Lachlan and myself, to go there and basically just sort of support the church there and just do whatever sort of ministry that we found to do during that time that he was away. So we went up there, and one of the things that we discovered about the Torres Strait Islands is that they work on island time. Does anyone know what island time is? If you've ever been to the islands, you'll understand this, and island time is very much at play in the Torres Strait. And so we found ourselves sitting around with a lot of time on our hands. And so one of the things that we did with that time was we got into fishing. And if Torres Strait Island is a wonderful place to go fishing. Now, usually I find fishing incredibly boring, and it just involves sitting there and wondering why you decided to take up this activity. But in the Torres Strait Islands, it's completely the opposite of that. It's a very exciting place to go fishing. And what you do in Cuban Village is they have this great big wharf down the front, and you go down to the wharf. You don't even need to take any bait with you. You just take a fishing rod, and you have an empty hook on a line, cast it in, because underneath that wharf is this huge school of little fish that just hangs out there. And so what you do is you put your hook in there and you flick it along like that, and hopefully it'll connect up with one of those little fish. And then you wind that in, and then you cast that little fish out, and hopefully you get a really big fish. And so we went down there, and we're trying to do this, and we're trying to catch those little fish, not having a whole lot of success. When this little kid comes up, first time, throws his line in, catches a fish, throws it in again, and before long he'd caught himself. Now, I don't know if it was this exact big fish here, but he was doing really well, and we thought, we have a lot to learn here. So we kept going down there each day, going down and doing some fishing. And you can see we had not a whole lot of success some of the times. Here's one of the buckets that I caught, and Lachlan caught this pipe. But eventually we started catching some fish. And but the thing about that we found out there was that just going down there, that all the locals would throughout the day, that a lot of people would go down there and have a go of fishing as well. And here's a picture again of that wharf. And so we were down there trying to learn from them how to catch these fish. And what we found is that we just found ourselves getting to know people down there on the wharf. And they'd be there and they'd ask us questions, we'd ask them questions, and they'd share with us. And these friendships with these people began to grow. And so here we are, we had this little church, and yes, we were preaching there on the weekend, and yes, we were doing some little programs and that sort of thing there. But what we ended up finding was the best ministry that was taking place was actually taking place right down there on the wharf with the fishing. And so I remember we were down there and we'd met this lady who's there on the right, and we eventually caught ourselves a big fish. And we were really excited about that. And she was watching on, and we'd been chatting with her, and I think she had seen that we didn't really know what we were doing. And so she came over to us and she said, "Do you have any idea how to cook that thing up?" And we were like, not really. And so she said, "Give it to me, go home for a few hours, and then I live at the house just there at the end of the wharf, and tonight, come over and I'll cook it up for you and we'll have a meal together." And we were like, awesome. So we went and then we turned up, And she'd cooked this fish up and had this amazing feast there, and we got to spend time with her. And she had her 2 kids that she introduced to us, and she shared of some of her story, and she shared some tough things that she'd been struggling with, and we had a wonderful time together, and we finished by having a prayer with her at the end. And throughout those next few weeks, we went back to her place a few times, and we started doing some Bible studies with her, and it led on to this really wonderful interaction that we were able to have. And it all started with a fishing rod. And so the thing that we discovered there in the Torres Strait was that our everyday hobbies and interests and our talents, and even our lack of talents, can be so helpful in sharing Jesus with others, because those things represent opportunities to connect with people. And connection is the starting point of being able to share Jesus with someone. Now, one of the things I love about the story of Jesus is that Jesus really modeled this in his life as well. Jesus showed us that in sharing the good news, it involves coming close to people. And I want to share with you some examples from the life of Jesus. So firstly, we have this thing called the Incarnation. Now, that's just a big fancy theological word to refer to that time when Jesus, God, left heaven and decided to come down to this world as a baby in order to bring about this plan of salvation for us. And if you think about that, it communicates a lot about God's desire to come close to us and the role that plays in sharing good news to the world. And he came so close to us, he even became one of us. And it's a pretty awesome thing. And so Jesus, in his just coming to this world as a human, shows us the importance of coming close. Now, the second thing is something that we often forget about the life of Jesus, and that is he spent a whole lot of his time on earth with a trade as a carpenter. In the Gospels, it refers to him as a carpenter, refers to him as a son of a carpenter. And it's interesting that pretty much most that we know about Jesus is from the last about 3 years of his life. What about the rest of his life? Well, it's likely that he spent a lot of that time working in the shop, building things. Why did Jesus do that? Why didn't he just spend all that time studying the scriptures and doing all Messiah type things? Well, maybe it was because that was a way that Jesus was able to come close to people. Let's move forward to when Jesus actually begins his sort of formal ministry, and he gets baptized, and one of the first things we see Jesus do is he goes to a wedding. Well, why is the Messiah hanging out at a wedding? Well, I think it's because that's where people were. And Jesus goes there because he's wanting to come close to people. And so Jesus gathers around himself this group of disciples, and these disciples were essentially students of Jesus who were going to learn how they can then go in turn and take the good news of salvation to the world. And I love the way that Jesus does this. The way that he doesn't do it is he doesn't say, all right, guys, we're going to have a class on how to share, on discipleship. It's going to happen down at the temple on Tuesdays and Thursdays between 9 and 2 p.m. And so I'll meet you there and we'll do some classes on discipleship. Jesus doesn't do that. Instead, he says, live with me. We're going to go around together. We're going to hang out. We're going to do life together. We're going to sleep in the same place. We're going to eat the same food. We're going to walk around we're going to do everything together. We're going to do life in close proximity to one another. We're going to do it in this context of this close relationship. And I imagine a lot of the biggest lessons from Jesus coming, not just from when he's preaching on the Mount, but as they were eating meals together and as they were maybe washing the dishes or whatever they were doing, as they were walking from place to place. It was in those moments that I think a lot of those amazing lessons from Jesus would have been heard. And then we see this lesson also in the way that Jesus interacted with others. Think of the story of Zacchaeus. So here's this little guy who is a bit of an outcast. People look to Zacchaeus and they think he's this terrible person who takes all our money away because he's a tax collector. And yet he has this desire to know something about Jesus. And so he climbs up into this tree. Jesus walks along and sees him. And do you remember what Jesus says? He says, come down, because I'm going to your house. I need to go to your house. And Jesus goes there, and I imagine they shared a meal together and they hung out. And again, in the way that Jesus interacted with people, he was showing the importance of coming close and making these connections. And then finally, with Jesus, with these disciples, he starts sending them out 2 by 2. And he tells them to go to the surrounding villages and the surrounding towns. And when they go there, they are to preach and they are to heal people. But Jesus gives them some very interesting instructions. He says, don't take with you a tent. Don't take with you any money even. Don't take with you any extra clothing. But what you are to do is when you go there, look for someone whose house you can stay at. And then just stay there at their house the whole time you're in that town. You're going to be eating with them. You're going to be sleeping in their bed. You're going to be doing life with them at that time. Why did Jesus give them that instruction? Maybe because Jesus is trying to show this lesson that sharing the good news involves coming close to people. And so this is why our everyday items, objects, our talents and our hobbies and our interests, these everyday things, this is why they're important. It's because friendships actually often are formed around these kinds of everyday things. And so I want you to think about your own life. What are the everyday things that God has given you? What are the talents, the hobbies, the interests that God has blessed you in your life? Could it be that those things are there to provide opportunities for connection, opportunities to have significant relationships with people, significant interactions with people that can actually have an eternal impact upon their life? And I want to encourage you. You might not know how to use these things in a way that's going to end up that sort of way, but I encourage you to take these things that are in your life and just to lay them before God and just say, hey God, I've got this interest in gardening. Can this be used for you in some way? Is this something that you can use for the building up of your kingdom? And just place it before God and just invite God to use the everyday aspects of your life. Maybe it's your work. Maybe you have a trade like Jesus did and you want to just say, hey God, this is what I'm spending a lot of my time doing. How can I use this to bless you and to bless others in some way, and just place it before God? I want to share with you a verse that I like from Matthew chapter 4. And it says this. It says, as Jesus was walking beside the Sea of Galilee, he saw 2 brothers, Simon called Peter and his brother Andrew. They were casting a net into the lake, for they were fishermen. Come follow me, Jesus said, and I will send you out to fish for people. The first thing I like about this is that Jesus is just walking along the side of the Sea of Galilee. Why is he not hanging out somewhere like the temple at this moment? Because I think Jesus was just wanting to encounter and interact with those everyday people. If you go to the temple, you'll meet lots of religious type people, but if you want to meet fishermen, you go to the Sea of Galilee. And so Jesus is walking along and he invites Peter to be one of his disciples, to live with him, to do life with him, and to be one of his followers. And then he finishes by saying this interesting thing. I will send you out to fish for people. To fish for people. What did that mean? Well, I think it means a couple of things. I think it means that there's something new that's going to be in Peter's life. So before, he was someone who spent all of his time and his energy gathering fish into his boat. Jesus is going to transform that and change that. And now he's going to spend a lot of his time and energy gathering people into the family of God. So there's a change that's going to take place there. But I think it also speaks to a continuity between the old Peter and the new Peter. The old Peter had his personality, he had his interests, he had his strengths, he had the various talents that God had given him. And I think in God saying, I'm going to take you from fishing for fish to fishing for people, he's saying, I'm going to take this person that I've created you to be, all of those strengths and all those talents, and I'm going to repackage that, repurpose that, and use that for something that's going to bless God and bless others. And so God wants to use us and all the uniquenesses that make up us to do things for him. So if we want to follow Jesus' example of reaching people, we have to come close to people. I want to share with you a quote from the book Ministry of Healing that many of you have probably heard before, but it's one of my favorite ones, and it says this. It says, Christ's method alone will give true success in reaching the people. The Saviour mingled with men as one who desired their good. He showed his sympathy for them. He ministered to their needs and won their confidence. Then he bade them follow me. So here we see a little, insight into the process that Jesus went in, as it said there, reaching people. And the first step for Jesus was mingling with people. And I think that's why Jesus went to that wedding. That's why Jesus went to Zacchaeus' house, and probably why Jesus spent so much time living as a carpenter, because he was mingling with people. He was just mixing amongst them and talking with them. As he talked with them, he listened to their stories, and he empathized with them, and he showed care to them. And as he learnt about the struggles that they were going through, he cared for those people, and he ministered to their needs. And eventually, when that relationship, that friendship was built, he invited them to follow him and invited them to take hold of the message of salvation. So the first step in reaching people is to mingle with people. And that's why all of these kinds of objects are actually so valuable to Jesus. The skills and the hobbies that you have are so valuable to Jesus, because it's around those things where a lot of that mingling can take place. But it's interesting that when Jesus did these things, he had a certain mindset that he went with. And he didn't just go to the wedding because he liked the food that was there at the wedding. He didn't just go to Zacchaeus' house because he wanted somewhere to stay. But Jesus went there with a certain mindset. When he went there, sure, he probably enjoyed those things, but he went there to connect with people. And as he was connecting with people, he was there to really connect and to hear their stories and to show his care to them and to minister to their needs and to share the hope with those people. And so there was a mindset that he went into those situations with as well. And I think this is a mindset that we can take from Jesus and bring into the everyday aspects of our lives as well. You might have a bike which you enjoy riding, but what happens when you bring the mindset of Jesus to that activity? It involves taking that and saying, well, how can I use this mindset in order to connect with people? And how can I show love through these everyday things that I have? And so I want to encourage you to try to bring the mindset of Jesus with you into these everyday areas. So the best ministry I think Jesus shows us is built upon friendships. And we've talked about how this is true in sharing Jesus and making disciples, but also I think this is true in acts of kindness as well. And I wonder if anyone here has had the experience where you've bought an expensive present for someone, maybe for Christmas, maybe for a birthday, and when you've given it to them, you've looked on their face and you've not quite been sure if they've really appreciated it. Have you ever done that? It's a bit disappointing, isn't it? But there's a difference when you give something to someone and they light up and you just know that this is the thing that they really, really wanted. That's a great feeling. And I think when it comes to showing kindness to others, this same sort of thing can happen. If you're putting a lot of effort to do things for others, but it's not actually meeting that felt need that they have, it's going to be a little bit like that Christmas present where they go, oh, thank you. But if it really connects with a felt need, wow, it's going to really make an impact on their life. Let me give you an example of this. A few years ago, there was a lady, at the church I was out on the Central Coast, there was a lady who'd been coming along, and I just got this sense that I should give her a phone call and see how she's going. And so I called her up. And as I was talking on the phone, she started sharing about how she'd been through these horrendous health issues that she'd had. And she had these issues with her balance, and she was struggling even to do basic things like going down to the shops to buy food. And she shared that she had this specialist appointment with a doctor in Sydney, which from the Central Coast is quite a long way away, but she wasn't allowed to drive her car, and so she was so stressed about how she might possibly get to this doctor's appointment. But she had a plan. She was going to catch this bus, and then she was going to catch this train, and she was going to go on this big, elaborate public transport way of getting to this doctor's appointment. But she was so incredibly stressed about this whole situation. And after I had this phone call, I was thinking, I wonder if there's anything that we can do to actually help her, because this doesn't seem like a really difficult thing to get her to this doctor's appointment. And so I rang a couple of people from a church, and there was a retired lady from a church who used to be a nurse, and I shared with her about this story, and she was like, oh, no worries, I'm not doing anything on that day. I'll see if I'll offer to go with her. And so I called this lady back up and I said, just letting you know, we've got this lady from church, and she'd met her before, so they already had a bit of a friendship. And I said, she's willing to go with you and just be with you on that whole adventure. You should have just heard the relief in her voice. She was just so amazed. That's so amazing. Oh, that just changes everything. Oh, I'm so glad that she would be willing to do that. Oh, that just is so amazing. And I remember after that conversation thinking, that was such an easy thing to do. Like the amount of time and energy that our church would spend into trying to help people, and yet this thing, which seems so little, just someone to go on a few hours on a bus and a train, had made such an impact. Why did it make such an impact? I think it was because there was alignment between the kindness that was being showed and the felt need that this woman had. Well, how do we encourage this sort of alignment to take place? Well, you've got to know people. You've got to come close to people. You've got to hear their struggles. You've got to actually listen to what's really going on. And that's where some of the most influential, if you want to multiply your efforts in showing kindness to people, then base it upon friendship. And so the best ministry is built upon friendships, But I'd like to suggest to you that there's even a bigger reason to invest in friendship. I'd like to suggest to you the biggest reason to invest in friendship is, any ideas? Friendship. The biggest reason to invest in friendship is friendship. Friendship is the big point of it all. And I want to just sort of illustrate this by just thinking about the grand narrative that we find in Scripture. Let's go all the way back to creation and ask ourselves the question, why did God choose to create our world? Now, I don't really know the mind of God, but if I was to assume, I would suggest that He didn't create our world because He had some really important task, and He just needed someone to do that task. I think God created our world because He wanted friends. Not in a needy, desperate, lonely sort of way, but because God is such a God of love and kindness and friendship, and He's a relational God, and He just wanted people to be in a relationship with. Fast forward to the cross. Why did Jesus come and go through that terrible agony upon the cross? I think it was friendship. That friendship that He initially had been broken, and He wanted to restore that friendship once again. Friendship is the big deal. I want to read for you a verse in Romans chapter 5 and verse 10 to 11, and it says this. For since our friendship with God was restored by the death of His Son, while we're still His enemies, we will certainly be saved through the life of His Son. So now we can rejoice in this wonderful new relationship with God because our Lord Jesus Christ has made us friends of God. That's the big deal. That's why Jesus went through those horrible things. He didn't have to, but He said, you know what? Friendship means so much to me that I'm going to go through those horrible things upon the cross. Jesus came to this world to die upon the cross, but the reason He died upon the cross is He wanted to be friends with us forever. And yes, we should share Jesus with our friends, but why should we share Jesus with our friends? Because we want that friendship to last forever. Jesus was all about coming close to people, and Jesus invites us to be people who come close to others as well. I wanted to spend a few minutes now introducing to you something that we're planning to do at Burwood Church, and it's called simply Burwood Groups. Now, for those who are part of our leadership team, you would have heard a bit about this before, but for those who aren't in our leadership team, this is the first time you'll be hearing about this, and we want to share this with you to get some feedback from you and invite you to be a part of it as well. So Burwood Groups is going to be launching next year, and a quick overview of what this is. So firstly, what is it? It's kind of a friendship initiative. Burwood Groups is, the aim is, what we're going to do is have a whole array of groups that you can be a part of that are going to be based around various types of interests. Now, some of those will be sort of the more usual small group type things that you might be more used to, where it might be a group where you meet together, that you gather around studying the Bible, or maybe you gather around prayer. So we'll have those types of things. But we'll also want to have ones that are gathered around various other things like hobbies. So maybe it might be a tennis group, It might be a music group. It might be an exercise group. It might be a group where you come together and you do painting. We also want to have some that are built around service type projects. It might be something where you, do backyard blitz type things. It might be things where you go along to the Croydon soup kitchen, those types of things. And we want them to be a whole range of different little groups that you can be a part of that gather around all sorts of interesting, exciting things with the purpose of simply experiencing that Christ-centered community. Now, why are we... there's some pictures of the types of things that it could involve. Why are we doing this? Well, as we've been talking about today, the real sort of goal is friendship. And if friendship is the basis of the best sorts of ministry a church can do, then we want to be a church that is built upon really great friendships. And so that's really the big goal, and we hope that there will be all those other things that flow out from it as well. Now, who will it involve? This will be something for you guys to be involved in. Who will be leading these? Well, to start with, we're going to be building a lot of these upon the things that we're already doing, but we are looking for some people that would like to lead some of these groups. So if you have a hobby or an interest and you would like to lead one of these groups, please let us know. When will this be happening? As I said, this will be launching beginning of next year, and they're going to be on a semester basis. And so the plan is to have 2 semesters in the year. So in the first half of the year, we'll have an array of groups on offer that you can be a part of, and then at the end of that first half of the year, they'll come to a close, and then the second half of the year, we'll have the semester 2 of the groups as well. So these are going to be lots of opportunities for you to be a part of these sorts of things. And so there's the idea. And if you want to be involved in it, how can you let us know? Well, we're not ready for you to sign up to the groups today. That's going to be the beginning of next year. But if you've got your phones with you, I invite you to pull them out, because we have a couple of things to respond to from this sermon. And one of those is going to be around Burwood groups, and the other thing will be around the message that we've had. So I invite you, pull your phones out, scan the QR. Oh, hang on, I haven't put it up yet. It's funny, I see the next screen up the front here, and so sometimes I think it's up there on the screen. So here's our QR code. If you've got your phone there, I invite you to have a scan. And part of the reason we do this, we're not going to do it every week, but it's just great for Fraser and I to have some feedback from you, and it's an opportunity for us to connect with you. So, if you've got that up on your phone, how can you respond to our message today? Well, the first thing is simply, I want to follow Jesus' example by investing in friendships. So, have you been listening to the message today and you're like, you know what, I need to make a bigger effort in this area. I want to follow Jesus' example. I invite you to tick that little box there. The second one that we have for you to say is, Jesus, I make my hobby, my talent, my interest available to be used by you. Now, this doesn't mean you have to lead one of the Burwood groups around it, but if you have an interest and you want to do, just as we talked about earlier, you want to just lay that before God and say, hey, God, I don't know what to do with this, but I just want to give it to you and invite your Spirit to use this in some way. I invite you to tick that second box. Box number 3 says, Jesus, I want to be your friend forever. And maybe you're someone here who maybe is new to this whole thing about God and Jesus, and I want you to know today that Jesus wants to be in an eternal friendship with you, and the only thing that will stop him is whether or not you want to be in response. And so if you wanted to say to God and say, hey, I want to be your friend forever, I invite you to tick that box there. Next, Burwood Groups. So I've shared just a little insight about what this Burwood Groups is going to look like next year, but we'd love your feedback. So if you have a great idea about what a group could be based around, I invite you to write that in the box in the response there. If you would like to lead a group, I invite you to write that down as well. And if you just have any feedback as well, if you think that's a terrible idea, that's never going to work, let us know and we can talk with you about that as well and hear what you have to say. We'd love to hear from you. And finally, there's one last little thing. This week we do have quite a small little new group that's starting. And there's a few people that have expressed in some of the previous sermons that they want to learn how to share the Bible with others. And we've got a little group that's going to start up around this. It's only 3 or 4 people at the moment, but if you would like to be part of it, we'd like to invite you. It's going to be a meeting to start with at Wayne and Wendy's house. And We're going to be meeting initially just on a weekly basis. That might turn to a fortnightly basis. But if you come along, tick that little box if you want to. And what we're going to do there is we're going to experiment with sharing Jesus with others. We're going to talk about it. We're going to pray about it. We're going to look at some resources. And there's going to be some really practical challenges there as well. So if you'd like to be a part of that, tick that box. And I'll be in touch with you before then. So I just really want to encourage you to reflect the love that Jesus has shown us in relationships and friendship.